How do social security institutions become more resilient and agile? This is the question we will be exploring in this Social Security Voices podcast from the International Social Security Association, ISA. My name is Sigve Bjørstad. I'm the head of communications at the ISA, and I'm delighted to be joined by Rand Bamra, Associate Dean of Royal Holloway at the University of London in the United Kingdom, and my colleague, Ernesto Braderson, Senior Officer in Social Security and Coordinator for the ISA Technical Commission on Organization, Management, and Innovation. So, Ran, let's start with you. When talking about resilience in Social Security, can you explain to us what we are building resilience for?
Good morning. Hello, Sigve. Thank you very much, and thank you to ISTA for the invitation to talk here. So you started with a really, really interesting question, and this is usually the question I tend to pose to people when I meet them and ask them, what are you building resilience for? So thank you for turning it around. So it's one of those words that can be confused quite a little bit, but my definition of it and the most basic understanding is that really organizational resilience is a characteristic of an organization, and it allows the organization to survive and adapt, but over a long period of time. So at its core, it's about survival and it's about renewal. And you hear about these terms such as bouncing back or bouncing forwards. I think forget about that. It's just about survival and renewal over a long period of time. And that is only exhibited over a long period of time. Um, so it's this ability to maintain, to serve people, while the world around us, of course, is shifting. Um, and then for social security institutions, I think the stakes really couldn't be very much higher, as we all understand. So we know the organizations exist to provide a safety net for people. So they're dealing with pensions, unemployment support, healthcare, disability benefits. And so the people who depend on these are, as we understand, most vulnerable, usually in society. So when you ask what we're building resilience for, it's not to protect ourselves from an earthquake or a typhoon. The real answer is, of course, we're building this to protect people who can't always protect themselves when things go wrong. So it's fundamentally important for societies. And of course, things do go wrong, particularly if we think about an economic recession, for example. So these organizations are challenged on a day-to-day basis. Under recession circumstances, then far more people you would see coming to the door and claiming for benefits. But at the same time, funding from governments can also be squeezed. So there's almost like a double hit that these organizations might have to be dealing with. We've all been through the recent global pandemic, and it forces you to change how you think about things. And sometimes it was a case of thinking about this overnight. So, and of course, other aspects that we deal with at the moment, new technologies are coming on all the time. So the world's changing very, very rapidly. And how do we sort of deal with all of these issues? There's a common term that's beginning to come into common usage. I don't like the term and the phrase rather, and the phrase is it's about that everything is a crisis. It's a polycrisis. I don't like the term polycrisis, but it's out there now. And so it begins to imagine everything as a crisis, which it necessarily always isn't. But there are certain challenges. So in addition to that, demographic change, aging population, and these are all making lots and lots of demands, new demands, maybe that weren't apparent a few decades ago. So what we're building resilience for is really to deal with this. I wouldn't say it's a permanent state of uncertainty, but it's an ongoing changing situation. And if we think back 20, 30 years, our memories tell us, yes, things were a little bit more stable. I think that's more than just a perception. That's a reality, looking at all the things that are happening around us at the moment. So organizations don't have to prepare and think about just a one-off event. So it's dealing with these things, the environment that's very complex, but also volatile in a number of different ways. And of course, the challenges they have are not uncommon to any other organization. Many similar organizations are in similar situations, but for organizations that serve people in society, it becomes very critical. So it's very important. So how do we deal with this turbulence? And we did a survey within ISA, and we found something quite interesting. We found that about three-quarters of the organizations said that they had a very sort of anticipatory mindset. They were looking for issues and problems before they were occurring. So they want to see these disruptions coming. But at the same time, although that's quite encouraging, at the same time, the survey also found that, and this is something we'll probably come to later, this idea of agility, this idea of being both flexible and quick to respond was one of the biggest challenges that they had, and
Okay,
how
so
to grasp that.
yeah, so
Yes,
maybe before we go into the aspect of
yes, of course.
agility, I'd maybe just like to ask Ernesto if you'd like to add something on this, because you mentioned something very interesting that not everything is a crisis. So of course we need to deal with a lot of challenge, or social security institutions, they need to deal with a lot of challenges on an everyday basis. I know certain things we can predict and certain things that are unpredictable and so on. So I'd like just to have Ernesto's
Yeah,
or yeah, see know about his aspect, or how he sees also this aspect of dealing with a crisis and the importance of resilience for social security institutions.
exactly. And I think it's what Ran was saying. It's we can't expect social security institutions to be in a constant state of crisis. We need to be able to um, show institutions how to really address this in a more systemic way. And of course, like Ram was talking about, building these capabilities, building this capacity for institutions that can deal with crisis, whether they are very short-term effects, very shock specific effects, where you can recover quickly and you can be able to really get back on your feet very quickly, or it's a bit more prolonged, probably maybe COVID was, and or maybe a longer recession comes to mind, where you have institutions and you have to have these both this plans, like you say, for the plans that are able to that we can actually foresee, but also look at ways that you can anticipate things that you probably cannot see or cannot afford to really mitigate these type of risks for. So probably nobody ever planned for a crisis like COVID ever, and probably and hopefully it will never come to that again. But it's this type of mindset that we need to really embed in institutions, because, like you say, we are living in a constant state of a much bigger crisis, whether it's cybersecurity is another example that I would like to throw in, which is now becoming a very big trend. But there's all kinds of different crises and floods and a lot of different crises that now social security institutions are now not only need to, but they are expected to be able to quickly be able to respond to and make sure that they can reliably continue to provide services despite of these crises. And I think that's the bigger challenge, and that's why we can't expect this crisis mode to be permanent in the institution, but rather really come to terms with the idea of really become more resilient within social security institutions and build both plans and capabilities for the things that we can foresee and we can plan for, but at the same time be able to respond to things that maybe we don't know exactly if it comes to or not, and maybe you don't even know this crisis, but we can respond to that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ernesto. Ran, you already mentioned that the ISA and Royal Holloway have done some joint research. And this dives into, well, we've now introduced sort of the importance of resilience for Social Security. And then we've looked in this research, we've looked at the concepts of agility, which you mentioned, and also creativity or the importance of these for building resilience. So if we start with agility, how does agility play a role in building resilience, and how does it help social security institutions become more resilient. So maybe Rand, you can start, and then Ernesto can develop a bit more on the social security and the institutional aspect.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. So agility is an interesting idea. So you could see it as sort of pretty much the heart, almost like the engine room of what resilience is really about. And so let me sort of tell you what I mean by that. So when we're talking about organizational resilience, our research identified sort of two fundamental dimensions of how organizations deal with, let's call it a disruption, when something unexpected occurs. So the first part is preparedness, and many organizations are familiar with this. And this is about how systematically an organization can think about the risks that may occur and have some developed plans and capabilities. So this is almost like a business continuity planning aspect of it, but it's also like forward thinking in terms of horizon scanning, I guess is another term organizations can use. And the second one is adaptation, and how flexibly and how quickly organizations can actually reallocate their resources as an organization. So when something changes, how can they change course when something unexpected happens? So these two dimensions are really important. And agility is part of this second part, this adaptation. And many people now understand that resilience, adaptation is really, really important, key part of that, and particularly if we want to survive over a long period of time. We think about ecosystems and forest fires and things like this. So we understand this in nature. It's the same meaning. So we define adaptation and agility as something that's learned within an organization. So it's to introduce another term some people may have heard of, is a dynamic capability. So capabilities, these are things that organizations deliberately develop and can deploy them quite quickly when they need them, and they change. So these are really hard things to get an idea about. Yes, we can talk about them theoretically, but organizations, how you put it into practice can be a bit tricky. So these things, this agility, these capabilities are characterized by such areas such as focusing on the future and an ability to integrate things and a willingness to experiment with new ideas. And of course, something that we're coming to perhaps is the empowerment of people through all levels of the organization. So all of these things help to make decisions quite quickly. Some of these things, many of them these things actually are not really new ideas. Okay, but those organizations who do this quite well are seen as good, surviving, successful organizations. Now, this is where it becomes interesting for social security organizations specifically, because we understand that these organizations are designed and built for stability. That's the most important thing, so they can deliver. And an interesting thing is there's an academic called Max Weber, you may have heard of, and he made a point about, this is over 100 years ago. He described the idea of bureaucracies and bringing that idea in as systems that are built on hierarchical control and standardized procedures. And so many things haven't changed in that time in regards how organizations can change. So these ideas are still very embedded in hierarchical control and what we need to do. So these are really important things for social security delivering organizations. So this is good in lots of ways because, it gives us accountability, you have consistency, people have trust in the system, and it's solid. But at the same time, those very features, of course, the hierarchy, standardizing procedures, following rules, these things become a bit of a liability when you come across something you're not familiar with, the environment changes, you have to change. And these are the things that are the barriers that prevent you from changing quickly and the barriers against agility. So the work of agility is quite bureaucratic, but you need that stable sort of core in an organization. But it doesn't need, for organization, it doesn't mean you have to throw what the rule book away necessarily. So in our research, we identified a number of different configurations as well. And of course, the most capable configuration for companies, organizations, was what we call the resilience focused. This takes a lot of resources. It's very agile. Organizations are very well prepared. planning rigorously, doing environmental and scanning. So they do all the things, all the right things really well, but not all organizations can do that. But the most important thing, I guess, from the research is that agility is something that organizations can learn. It's not something that's fixed. So they can develop agile capabilities to a number of things, such as decentralizing decision making. And again, like I said earlier, this is not something that's rocket science or brain surgery, something that's new. It's known for a long time in organizational design. Allowing middle-level managers, for example, to take accountability, to make more calls when an incident occurs, because they're closest to it. Having cross-functional teams and all of these things that we understand as managers and sort of developers of strategy, these things are important. And of course, technology is very important. This is something perhaps I'm sure Ernesto knows a lot more than I do, and as an enabler there. But the bottom line is that agility is a really, really strong element of what makes an organization resilient. Beyond just absorbing shocks, it helps you to reshape how organizations can respond in that moment. So it's for organizations, social security organizations, not something that it's a nice thing to have. It becomes an essential to think about these things.
And you say that's, I mean, some of these things are well known. It's not like it's rocket science or something new, but we need a reminder. And also, the interesting thing in your research, I think, is that you look at this specifically from the aspect of social security institutions. And parts of what you're explaining now is covered, I think, in this article that both of you have written and is published in the International Social Security Review, and which we can link to from the podcast, so that our listeners can go and read it. But Ernesto, before we move on, maybe you want to add a little bit on this aspect of agility.
Yes, I think it's in social security institutions, agility becomes a true capability to really be a much more able to really respond quickly to different events. Like pretty much tautologically, we're defining agility, but the ability to really be more have shorter term strategic planning, for example, or create a culture that within the institution can actually look at alternatives, like Ran was talking about. No, trying to look at, you have a frame set. You do need this frame set. You need this rule book to as a grounding foundations to build on, but you do need to find these solutions, especially when these exceptions and these events really happen, to be really able to really tackle some of these events. And like I was saying, I mean, these are not really new methodologies, like co-design methodologies, embedding co-design methodologies, empowering individuals, and to really have these flexible service delivery models are really part of the repertoire of tools that we can actually have, and of course maybe also think about maybe including different organizational structures that really foster this agile mechanisms for responding. No, I think it's really where it's not only about the adaptation, it's really how we adapt. And it goes to the point that Ran was talking about, is to be able to build this capability within institutions to really shift quickly when these alternatives are closing, you know, and to do it within the framework. We don't abandon the strategy. We don't abandon the structures. We were the processes that we laid out, because that covers a mainstream, but those processes need this boost of agility, especially with when we're facing a crisis that probably break out of these procedures that we probably planned for, and we need this kind of flexible environment where we can actually do some of these things, and including experimentation and other things like and we're going to probably talk more about that after, about creativity.
Okay, so let's move on to that. So we've established the concept of, or the importance of resilience for Social Security institutions, and the importance of, or the role of agility for building resilience. And then we have this aspect of creativity. So Ran, what is the role of creativity for resilience? And Ernesto, maybe you can follow up with a bit on how Social Security institutions can foster this creativity. So Ran, first to you.
Yes, thank you. I think it's interesting. I think on the surface it might appear a little bit counterintuitive, thinking about social security organizations and then creativity in the same sentence. It sounds like an unlikely combination, but stick with me on this one. And it becomes very, very important. And it's probably one of the most underappreciated parts of our research. So when we think about creativity, we think in an organizational context, I guess, we're talking about sort of something that's novel, useful, some sort of, organizations have to innovate, bring new things and new ideas out. But really, we're talking about some of these ideas. We're looking at the processes and we're looking at also the solutions. So creativity in organizations is not some individual who sits in their lunchtime with a crayon on a piece of paper making spiral drawing. So it becomes very much, although it's actually that's quite important, believe it or not, as an exercise in generating creativity. So to come across and face a problem that you've never faced before, how do you go beyond this? And this is something we as organizations have to begin to learn. Social security creativity shows up now in a number of different ways. And certainly we've all had, everybody, the globe has gone through the COVID-19 experience from a few years ago. So originally for social security organizations, I imagine, there's people that are walking into buildings and offices, there's paper-based applications, there's face-to-face assessments that organizations needed to do. All that stopped overnight. So organizations had to develop and think about a new way of working. So digital service channels, and Ernesto can speak well on this, remote assessments, new ways of kind of verifying eligibility of people. So organizations had to do something because there were the backs were against the wall. You had to do something. You're forced to do something. So what does it mean to foster creativity for such organizations? Now, the research tends to say a few things about this. And it talks about having a climate for such innovation. Again, this is not new stuff. There's a whole body of work and organizations that innovate. How do they do that? They have this climate. And part of this climate is they create the conditions for people to feel safe. They can within their organization to come up with new things, new ideas, things that might not work. So this idea of experimentation, trying something, and if it fails, that's okay. So they won't be punished for them or seen in a different way. So this culture exists. They have the freedom to think about these things, and part of this autonomy then becomes very real in terms of their work becomes meaningful in a different way. So it's a very difficult thing to understand, but it's also a cultural shift, right? So there's also very well-known research from Amabile and Pratt from a while ago, the sort of leading scholars in creativity, and they showed that in this intrinsic motivation in organizations is really, really important in creating this environment for creativity. So people become more creative when they feel, a sense of purpose and they can progress and not just following a set of rules or instructions. So therein lies the problem, because many people's day jobs are do this, do this, do this, this, then we have to go through, and you don't have that space and time. So making space and time is important, and that's kind of key aspect for leaderships to be able to allow this in organizations, allow this experimentation. And be transparent about things that they've learned, the organization has learned, and also transparent about failures. And that's the key thing, learning from failures too. And another thing that was quite interesting is the value perhaps of external perspectives, fresh pair of eyes, bringing somebody in gives sometimes a new impetus. And any organization that does projects or brings in consultants or even, cross organizational thinking and collaboration gets this new idea this new fresh pair of eyes, and they can see value in that. So that's helpful. But one important nuance from the research is, and something I think should be understood, is we're not saying this is necessary. Creativity environment should necessarily be right across every single function of an organization. For example, you may not want your your accounting department to be very creative, right? Maybe you do want a creative accountant. I don't know. You might want your catering facility. Yes, we do want you to be creative. We're a bit tired of sort of burger and chips, right? Burger and fries. So you want your fraud detection unit, perhaps. Do you want them to improvise? I don't know. Do you want your control and auditing functions to be creative? Perhaps not so much. But things like, how do you serve your customers well? How do you capture as many of your people out there? Customer service, designing business governance strategy. So these are kind of the things that we've become important for creativity. And I think Ernesto certainly and I have talked about this idea of dynamism, and that's what the research we did with ISA touched on as well. So,
Ernesto, do you want to develop a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think well, a couple of things. It reminded me the day of sharing bad experiences. They called it something else, a little bit stronger in this institution. And they had it was a really interesting, it's a social security institution that got together in a certain day to share all the things that failed. And I think that's an excellent example, actually, of how do you create this safe environment where you can say, well, we tried this, but it didn't really work, because you learn as much from the good things as well as from the things that go wrong. So I think it's a really key element. Ultimately, it's also about problem solving, and really putting yourselves in the shoes of somebody else. And like Anne was mentioning, it's not something new. We've been developing a lot of these methodologies and approaches, like human-centered approaches, to really understand what somebody else is really talking about. Active listening and active communication mechanisms. These are really crucial elements that approaches that institutions have already been developing and really identifying. And I think this is where this safe environment to really be creative. I'll go back to the fraud because there could be a creative alternative for fraud prevention as well. But it's really about understanding where the process is you're only doing marginal improvements to process, and you really need to think back and really do something more deeper. And with technology as it is, and going back to the fraud prevention, I will add, there is probably a creativity angle for fraud, because you want to look at fraud prevention is also being able to identify these patterns that you probably were not able to look at and picked on before. So there is a little bit of creativity. Yes, maybe accounting, maybe a little bit less prone to creativity as a discipline, as something that you want to make sure, because we need to make sure that the things are stable. That is part of our foundationals, that we want to make sure. But there are many, and in the paper we actually look at all the different type of functions that both agility and creativity actually can add this significant value, whether it's from a governance standpoint, the business units, or the customer facing or operations. For example, in technology, going back to the hardcore area of technology needs a lot of creativity to find solutions where things probably went wrong that we didn't know that could go wrong. Maybe it's a configuration that we had not tested before, and these creates. We need a robust system, but sometimes we have to identify, especially for example, cybersecurity threats. We need to really identify. Now it's even more. People are getting more creative on the outside, and when it comes to resilience on the inside, we need to be just as creative to be able to respond to that. respond to that creativity itself that's coming from the outside.
Thank you. I'd just like to remind our listeners, you are joining us on this ISA podcast, Social Security Voices. We're talking to Ran Bamra from Royal Holloway in the United Kingdom, and Ernesto Brodersen, my colleague here at the ISA. And we've gone through the importance of resilience for Social Security and how agility and creativity play into resilience and building that resilience. And I'd like to round off with a question that both of you have touched upon, but just to develop a little bit more on that, because in social security institutions, they need to be stable and they need to be trusted. So how do you find that right balance between being stable and trusted, and also being agile and being even creative? So maybe Ran, again, you can start, and then Ernesto, you can round off.
Yes, so this balance is probably the most important thing here, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy because we understand the first point that stability is diminishing, uncertainty perhaps is growing, and what that means is what works today, next month, this year may not completely be good enough, and the year after. So this is the important thing, this understanding of how do you adapt your organization to deal with the changing environment, to be adaptable. So a few things, I guess, stand out really. So the first is we understand that having this anticipatory mindset, anticipation, and we understand that nothing is permanent, and to keep a lookout for that. So our research found that most organizations, as I said before, they do try and scan the horizon to spot these risks early. So this is a good thing. They understand the importance of this. So this systematic, environmental monitoring is absolutely critical. So you can't be buried, have your head in the sand and getting on with the day job. It's got to be more than that. The digital transformation aspect also, and we know this is going to be huge. So I know this is not about AI, but we can't go too deeply into that. But this how AI will be changing everything. It does enable processes and systems to get to the right answer quicker. So, and that's computing anyway, as computers become faster. I'm not going to say they're cleverer, because that's a whole different idea about intelligence. But there will be a point. And so these are already shaping how social security organizations administer what they do. And then, of course, and a really important part then, I think, is probably close to the heart of all sorts of social security leadership is this idea of trust from the stakeholders, because these are essentially public institutions serving the public, people, us. So if the social security system becomes slow, if they're not delivering how they should be, if they think the system maybe is a little bit opaque, unresponsive, or even unfair, people begin to lose in trust in the institution's ability to serve them. And that's also that's quite dangerous, I guess. So resilience really is investing in this sort of transparency, responsiveness, making sure you're meeting the needs, and you're on that side of, if there are sides in this position, taking that position. So it's more than just communications. It's actually really important that governance is there at the heart of this. And I think fundamentally, it is about organizational design, and how we can be flexible enough to change as the environment changes. And that's always been the key to survival and resilience. So this idea between balancing stability and adaptability, this dynamism, each organization has to find their own place, but there are certainly good practices they can adopt and embed and try and work with for sure. And these are some of the things we've sort of discussed just now. So there is learning. So we want to be reliable but agile. And yes, it is a balance. You've got that point absolutely right.
Thank you. Ernesto, would you like to add something?
I couldn't agree more with everything Ram was just mentioning. They're at the core of the good governance principles that we have also at ISA. No, it's about predictability, it's about accountability, and wanting to make sure that things are reliable on a regular basis. But it is also, we need to recognize that all of these are really to deliver value and to deliver services and do it efficiently to the members themselves. The minute we lose one of these pivot points, then we need to really ask ourselves if we have a very rigid institutional structure, organizational structure, that doesn't really give us the space to be agile in case of a shock or in case of an event, and to be creative, to really solve in a way things in a way, then we may be really losing track of our mandate in Social Security, because we can't really deliver what we promise. It's not only about the actual service, it's actually the value of Social Security institutions. And when is it more valuable than when the crisis hits you? When is it more valuable, as Ran said at the very beginning? When is Social Security more valuable? It's when the shocks really come. It's when you don't expect things to go wrong. And as the social fabric that we have in Social Security, that's when we have to deliver. And to be able to do that, we need to balance, like Ran was saying, and understand where these processes and procedures need to have this real solid structure, but have principles in place that allow us to have this ability to be agile, to be creative, to really be tackling the things. We can kind of think of it as a three-pronged approach. We know the things, the core of our business really has to be reliable and planned for the regular business, but then we need to plan for these unforeseen events. But then we need to plan for the unplanned. So what happens then? That's when we need to rely more on these concepts around agility and creativity, because in reality, we cannot in practice really cover all type of different events and issues. And that's where really it becomes a challenge in Social Security, because we do need the solid, we need to build on that. And with these principles and these three-pronged approach, so to speak, we need to be able to build this resilience in all three angles, and we need to balance this in this way and understand, like Ran was saying earlier, where do we apply agility and where do we apply creativity? And the paper really starts to address that, and we need to develop that a bit more. And we're doing precisely that at this training.
Wonderful. We need to plan for the unplanned. I think that's the bottom line for this podcast. I'd like to conclude by thanking you, Ran Damra from Royal Holloway, University of London. It's been great. My colleague Ernesto Barderson, we've gone through the importance of resilience, agility, and creativity for Social Security institutions. I encourage our listeners to read the article that you have both authored, which is published in the International Social Security Review, and which we will link to from this podcast. And there's also a lot more information on our website, www.issa.int, on these concepts and on the partnership between the ISA and Royal Holloway. So please visit our website to learn more. Thank you very much, and welcome back to one of our new podcasts very soon. Thank you.